With the 2025 draft almost here, I want to go through one of my last rankings of this draft process, going through each position of prospects in this NHL draft and ranking the top 10 prospects from each of them. Today, we're going to be going through the top forwards, defensemen, goaltenders of this draft, ranking them from 1 to number 10. We're also going to be going into detail into which of the defensemen are left defensemen, right D, which of the forwards are wingers or centers long-term, and everything you need to know about these guys to see which could end up on your team. So make sure you guys watch till the end as we go through all the prospect talk here today, and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this as we lead up to the NHL draft so soon. Now we have a lot of prospects to get into today, but let's first start out with my top 10 forwards in this year's draft class, starting out with my number 1 and my number 1 center in this class in Michael Misa. Now he has played wing in the past, but I think Michael Misa projects most as a centerman. So detail-oriented, his play on the rush and his skill set is transcendent. I think he is a fantastic first-line center of the future, and if he's your number 2 like he could be in San Jose, he's going to be excellent alongside Celebrini. As for my number 2 forward in this year's draft class, I have to go with James Hagens. I would say widely one of the more disrespected prospects inside the top 10. Still one of the best playmakers of this draft with his vision and creativity. He's somebody that just loves to create, loves to make so much with the puck on his stick. And you can see, even though the production wasn't unbelievable this year, a point per game in the NCAA, it's still pretty hard to do as a freshman. And about Hagens, especially throughout the course of the season, just got better and better in his overall game and his physicality, and I think projects still extremely well onto the NHL. On to number 3, we go on to our first wing on the list in Porter Martone. Somebody that I think brings so much potential, just has to unlock a little bit more of it. At 6'3", 205 pounds, somebody that's been labeled as more of a power forward, but I love his rush ability. His ability one-on-one is fantastic. He's just somebody I want to see be more assertive, be quicker on his skating, especially with his pace. That's, I think, the biggest hurdle for him. But as a playmaker, as a creator, there is so much to like there, and the way he drives the net and makes things interesting, I think team is going to absolutely adore him once they draft him. On to number 4, and another winger inside this top 10. I got Victor Eklund out of the Allsvenskan. Somebody that I think is also, similarly to Hagens, getting a little bit overlooked when it comes to the top 10, and especially even on draft day, is very likely to slide outside of it. But honestly, I don't think he should. Even though he isn't the tallest player in the world, he is so strong on his skates, and that feeds his game extraordinarily well since he is an absolute pest on the ice. He's looking to make chaos, he's looking to get the puck back, and he will win basically every single board battle that you throw at him. Plus the goal scoring and his knack for the net, I think just makes him such a projectable piece and somebody that I think will pretty easily be a top 6 wing. On to number 5, we're going to go on to one of my favorite players in this draft class in Jake O'Brien, who I think is right up there with James Hagens as some of the best playmaking you'll find in this class. In O'Brien's case, I think he's just so good at finding his teammates, driving up the ice, and making that speed apparent. I think for his size, he's one of the better skaters in this class, and I don't think he's getting much attention for that, but his speed up the rush, I think, is a massive part of things, and how good he is in transition, I think, will fuel a lot of his NHL game. He's somebody that I want to see use his physicality a little bit more, and some of that consistency defensively. It has you wanting a little bit more as well, but the potential is sky high. On to number 6, we go on to Anton Frendel, and even though he is listed as a center, I'm going to be honest, I think the more I watch him, the more I think about him, I think he will be a left wing long term. In Frendel's case, he brings a pretty big physicality and a big size to him. Even though he's not tall at 6'1", 205 pounds, he has so much muscle on him, and he uses that in his game. He's great at protecting the puck, great at, once he's in the offensive zone, finding that little bit of space to get that goal scoring edge in. He loves to just find that extra little space, especially in front of the net, to get that one-time shot off in quick succession. He's not somebody that is going to be creating many plays for you, but he's going to be finishing them in a high rate. And especially as a goal scorer, as a power play guy, I think he's going to find a lot of success at the NHL level. On to the next forward here, and somebody that I do have lower compared to most of the consensus in Caleb Denoye, but I still do like him quite a bit, and I think he'll be one of the better forwards of this draft class, especially in terms of the transition ability and his vision with the puck on his stick. It is magical to see the type of passes he's able to pull off. I have some concerns over the work ethic sometimes, and there are times where I want to see him be a little bit more flashy with his pace, but he's just such a smart player in his positioning that I think he'll end up pretty fine and will be a middle 6 center, I think, no matter what. On to another forward that I think goes pretty underrated in this class in Colin Potter, somebody that I fully expect to go in the late first, potentially the early second round when it's all said and done, but I don't really think should be. I think he should be a top 15 pick. The creativity is at a draft high level. I think he's one of the best processors, and in terms of the pace and how much he uses his speed in so many creative ways, it's just so much fun to watch. I mean, in the NCAA, he wasn't putting up gargantuan numbers, but he was a super young player for the NCAA, and at the U18 World Juniors, years, I thought that's where he showed a lot of his value, with how good he was both on and off the puck. I think he's somebody that with the high-end skill he also brings, has so much potential to give. A little bit of a boomer bust, I guess, but for me, he has so much skill and so much potential that I don't really care about that. On to number 9, we go into a forward that I would say is much more projectable, though, in Braden Coots out of the Seattle Thunderbirds. If you're looking for a future NHL middle six centerman, I mean, Coots is about one of the best bets you can make, especially outside the top 10. I absolutely adore this guy with the anticipation of play. His positioning is rock solid. He's so good at creating turnovers, so good at creating for his teammates as well off the rush. I just love him so much. He's going to be such a fun player, such a nasty guy to play against, but somebody that just wins games in the end. He is so clutch, so good in those final minutes at making the game dependable, and in the defensive zone, making things interesting, getting after the puck, using his intensity in smart ways consistently. I just think Coots is going to be a dog and a fan favorite for sure. On to the 10th best forward of this draft class for me, I'm going to go on to Carter Bear, who I think is a pretty similar story, though somebody that I think is going to be much more of a left wing long term. I think in Bear's case, I love the intensity. I love how much he just puts himself out there, wanting to create chaos, and more than Coots, wanting to use that physicality in major ways. I do think Bear has a little bit more potential in terms of his goal scoring, especially. You look this year in 56 games, 40 goals, 82 points, absolute superstar in the goal scoring department. I have a little bit more concerns over how it's going to translate, how much of an intense player he's going to be, but I think he could be a really special gem and somebody that's going to be a great complementary piece, potentially on your first line. Starting us out as the top 10 defenseman here, a big surprise is Matthew Schaefer at number 1, and it's for so many critical reasons. His skating, his confidence, his absolute dog-in-a-bone mentality in transition. Put those things together, and I think you have so much potential here as a top pair defenseman in the future. I do lean a little more offensive than defensive when it comes to his NHL potential, but I still think there's opportunities for him to be a solid defensive player of how good his skating is and how much of a smart player he is on the defensive end. Offensively, though, when it comes to the skating, when it comes to the skill, he's going to be setting up plays in so many fascinating ways, and I cannot wait to see it happen at the NHL level. But now moving on to the second best defenseman of this draft class, and this is where things spread out quite a bit. There's been a lot of discussion in this placement throughout the entire year for pretty much everybody out there. But at number 2, I always lean now towards Ratty Murka. Even though he might not be nearly as flashy as a Matthew Schaefer, I think Murka is going to be so dependable in the future. Obviously, the size is a big component, 6'6", 218 pounds, but I think he absolutely flies for his size and is an actually really underrated transition piece. I think he's somebody, though, that defensively, that's going to be the main value for him. How good of a stopper he is with his stick, how good his positioning is. There are times where I want to see him be a little bit more effective, and there are some decisions at where you can kind of get a little bit overwhelmed, but at the same time, the potential I think is massive, and what you can build off here I think is going to be so interesting to look back on. On to number 3. Next up, we go on a defenseman that I think is going to be an absolute circus in the NHL in so many great ways, in Kashan Aitchison. If you're looking for excitement, there's really no prospects out there in this class that bring it as consistently as Aitchison. With the goal scoring, the massive hits, the fighting, I mean, Aitchison is willing to put his entire body on the line to make sure his team gets the win in the end. But you see in 64 OHL games this year, 26 goals, 59 points, a solid playoffs as well as 6 goals and 6 assists. Aitchison, I think most of his value offensively is going to be from that shot, but I think he also just has so much intensity in his whole game, and in transition loves to step up in it as well. So I think in a lot of ways there's a value to get out of a player like Aitchison, even though I think his upside and that ceiling is slightly limited. At number 4, we go into somebody that I think is going to be a dependable middle pair defenseman in the future. Let's go into Logan Hensler of the University of Wisconsin. And even though I think he has his problems, sometimes in the defensive zone, I want to see him be a little bit more aggressive, and that is also the same on the offensive side of things. But I think throughout the course of the year, in the second half especially, you saw Hensler using that confidence a lot more, that skating ability a lot more, to rise up the ice, use his body in transition, actually set up some more plays here and there, and I think he was really great at doing so. In the first half, there were some Big Ten troubles, there were situations where the competition was overwhelming him, but I think eventually he just got better and better throughout the course of the season. The base of tools, though, I think is the most interesting part for Hensler. I think that's ultimately will put him over the top and get him a lot of NHL minutes, and he'll do pretty good at that. Number 5, we're going to go on to Cameron Reed of the Kitchener Rangers. Somebody that I like quite a bit, might have some boomer best potential because of the size, but I don't think it'll matter too much in the end. In Reed's case, I think he's just kind of like a mini Matthew Schaefer, not as tall and not as overwhelmingly unbelievable offensively quickly at times, but he can still dazzle you in the rush and on the offensive side of things. I think especially as a passer out of his own zone, he's a really effective player in starting the rush or connecting to a player to get that rush going. I mean, he's something that is always forward thinking, always offensively leaning. Defensively, there are some times where I want to see him be a little more assertive and actually use that body in bigger ways, but sometimes he just doesn't have the capacity to do that since he's not this massive defenseman. But I think as a second power play guy, somebody that is really going to be good in transition as a middle pair defenseman, I think Reed's going to go under the radar, but be a solid NHLer. At number 6, we're going to go on to one of the most talented defensemen on this list in Jackson Smith, recent commit to Penn State University. And I will say this, again, just off talent alone, I think he would be number 2 on this list. How he's able to make the passes he makes, it's unbelievable to watch, the creativity on display. There are just times defensively where I just think it does not work. He barely uses his body, he's not assertive enough, and just often leaves pucks and teammates to dry. It's a situation where I think his decision-making and his lack of confidence defensively kind of does hurt him at points. But when he does have the puck, when he is in transition, when he is in the offensive zone, there is so much to like there. I just think he'll be a little bit of a coach's nuisance, a little bit of a problem when it comes to the actual playing time, because I don't think he's a dependable type of defenseman. But at his best, oh boy, he can do some magical stuff. At number 7, we're going to go to basically the polar opposite defenseman here, and another WHLer in Blake Fiddler of the Edmonton Oil Kings. And I'll say this, 6'4", 209 pounds, and how Fiddler skates, how he processes the game, I think he's going to be a very effective number 5, number 4 defensive defenseman. I just don't think we're getting too much more than that. I think he has a decent shot to him, and that could lead to some goals here and there, but I see him being a mostly 15 to 20 point defenseman in the NHL. Still somebody, though, with the size and with the pedigree he presents, I think he'll be a very consistent NHLer for a long time, using that body in great physical ways, and in the playoffs, logging a lot of minutes and getting them through pretty efficiently. At number 8, we're going to go on to one of the most curious projects, I would say, on the list in Sasha Boumediene out of Boston University, who I think has a lot of potential, a lot of talent with the puck on his stick especially, but oftentimes leaves you wanting in terms of the decision-making and the defensive processing. And there are times where I think, again, the puck-moving ability, the skating especially, is eye-popping. The skill on display is great here. I just don't really see him being much of a pure offense defenseman. I don't think he has quite the chops for that. And defensively, I think there are just too many problems for me to rate him too much higher. But I think he could be a solid two-way defenseman, a solid maybe number 4, number 5 type of D. But again, that lack of true identity, I think could hurt him at the NHL level eventually. But for now, though, still a really solid prospect. At number 9, another curious case as well when it comes to the tools and how they apply them, we go on to Henry Brustewitz out of the London Knights, who, of course, now Memorial Cup champion, a pretty big part of that team as Sam Dickinson's line mates. I think in Brustewitz's case, he brings a lot of potential to the game with his skating, with the transition ability. He really wants to jump into the play and be more of an offensive defenseman. I do think eventually, though, Brustewitz is going to be filled into more of a defensive role, and I do think he has the chops for it in terms of the tools and how he presents himself physically. He's looking to make big hits pretty much constantly and use that physicality in front of the net in good ways. I just think there are times where he can be lost a little bit in the play, especially in the defensive zone, when things get cycled around for a minute or a minute and a half. He can sometimes be a little bit too passive in that situation. So I think there are things to improve on in Brucewitz's case, but some good traits to build on for sure. Then we go into the last defenseman here inside the top 10, and another one I would say pretty similar to a Blake Fiddler in Kurban Limatov, one of the most interesting Russian defensemen in general in this class. I mean, I think he's absolutely the best by far. I mean, 6'4", 190 pounds. I think he has all the makings of a solid stopper at the NHL level. His skating, I think, is a massive part of things. For how big he is so good at using that skating to overwhelm opponents, really get in their face, make speedy edges, and make things, especially around the net, a lot easier for his team. He's able to escape pressure well, and that to me is, I think, the biggest thing. I don't think you're going to be getting much offense. I think you're going to be getting a 10, 15 point type of defenseman, but for how consistent, how steady he is on defense, I don't think it's going to matter much. Now let's get into my most anticipated part of this video in the top 10 goalies, because you could go through my rankings, my top 75, and list out just the best forwards, the best defensemen that I ranked on that list, but in the terms of the goaltenders, I did not list 10 guys inside my top 75, so things especially get a lot more interesting towards the second half of this top 10. But I want to talk about the first half because I think it is all over the place when it comes to the consensus now, because even though Ravensburgen and Ivan Kovic especially have gotten the most attention, I don't think they're the two best goaltenders in this draft class. I'm sorry. They're definitely up there, and both of them are second round plus type of guys for me, but not quite at that unbelievable level that I need to take them in the first 25 picks or whatever a team might select them at this year's draft. And talking about my number one goaltender in this draft class, let's go into Alexei Medvedev out of the London Knights. Now, I think the last time he was measured, he was like 6'1", 170. Now, 6'3", 181. So he has some pretty big statistics to him. And I honestly, outside of that, if he was 6'1", he still would have been my number one goaltender in this class because of the fundamentals and just how good of a goalie he is consistently. You see in 34 games in the OHL this year, 912 save percentage. Obviously, London is an absolute wagon, but I love how Medvedev plays the game, how good he is in anticipating the play, and especially when things get tough, when things get hectic around the net, Medvedev is so quiet. He's so composed, and I think that's a big reason why he will be one of the first goaltenders selected in this year's draft. He just has all the makings of a successful player in the NHL especially. On to the second best goalie in this draft for me, we go on to yet another Russian goalie, and you'll see a bit of a theme on the top three, and Pyotr Andrianov, who I think is a massive one here. Not in terms of the size, but in terms of the statistical profile. I mean, 6'2", 207 pounds is still a pretty solid height to weight ratio. But you see in the MHL this year, man, unbelievable numbers. In 37 games, 1.75 goals against average, a 942 save percentage, plus a 929 save percentage in the playoffs, which is basically horrible for him. But in Andrianov's case, the big thing to me is the athleticism and how good of a skater he is in goal. He's somebody that is able to track pucks quickly, get to those loose areas, and be able to cover for his team pretty effectively. I think that's a massive thing in the NHL, and even though he's a smaller goaltender, still 6'2", 207 pounds is enough to get by, especially for Andrianov and how good he moves. Now, there's not much of a difference between number 2 and number 3 for me, but at number 3, I got Semyon Frolov, another goaltender out of the MHL, who also had a solid season, not as good as Andrianov, but you see in the MHL some decent statistics there. I think in terms of Frolov, though, he's pretty similar to Andrianov, where the athleticism is a major component, also tracks pucks pretty well. I think in his case, though, is not quite as athletic, not quite as speedy as Andrianov, which does bump him down a little bit, but I still think has potentially starter potential in the NHL. It's just going to be more of a project, I would say, than Andrianov at this point. At number 4, this is where we get into the Canadian goaltending side here in Joshua Ravensbergen, and I will say this, even though he's not quite as high for me as other people, and especially NHL teams, I would imagine, I still think he's going to be an NHL goaltender. Just more of a consistent backup, I would say. The size, though, of course, a big thing at 6'5", 192 pounds, and a decent season with Prince George, a 901 save percentage in 51 games. In terms of Ravensbergen, even though the size is there, I just don't know if he quite uses it perfectly. I think the biggest thing to me is that he's just not great at really improvising. He's not great at making quick movements and really making pressure for the other team to shoot. He's just a team that a goaltender that's a little bit more passive to me, and that's fine. You can get by with that at 6'5", but for only so long. And I think in Ravensbergen's case, he doesn't quite bring that unreal starter potential that I was kind of hoping he'd bring coming into the year. At number 5, we go on to a player that is much smaller, but I think is pretty similar in terms of the projection in Jack Ivankovic. And I think in his case, he's going to be a backup as well. I think he'll make it eventually, but might have some harder times than Ravensbergen getting that trust just because of the size difference. A much different goaltender, though. In Ravensbergen's case, of course, he doesn't have to be this super quick goaltender and improvise as much as a player like Ivankovic, but that's really the bread and butter when it comes to Ivankovic's game, is making those quick movements, getting into spots consistently, and trying to be as aggressive as possible. And in terms of the clutch gene, in terms of how good he is late in games, I think that's also a pretty big aspect. He's something that is just a winner in so many ways, tries to be as much as possible, and just good in those high pressure situations. And that could lead to maybe a more successful NHL career than a Ravensbergen, for example. Now on to number 6, and we're going to go on to our first overager, I think, on the list in general, in Petteri Rimponen, who you might have heard of because of this last year's World Juniors. And here's the thing, I don't usually love overagers, but in this year's draft where it's so all over the place, a player like Rimponen, who has shown up so well, automatically just goes so much higher. It does also help that he's not the oldest overager in the world, being only an April birthday, so he only turned 19 this last April, but look at what he has done in this season. Look at how much he has improved on himself. He was already a decent goaltending prospect, but this year in the Liga, as an 18-year-old mostly, he played 40 games, got a 912 save percentage and 920 save percentage in the 5 games he played in the playoffs, plus at the World Juniors, of course, was absolutely stellar for the Finns. A 933 save percentage in 7 games. Similar to Ivankovic, isn't the biggest goaltender in the world, but my goodness, I think in terms of the smarts, in terms of the consistency, he is so good with his work ethic, so good with how he presents himself, and is just a good goaltender. And at the end of the day, that's what matters most. On to number 7, we're going to go on to the USHL here and move on to Slovak goaltender Michael Pradl, who I think is one of the bigger potentials in this draft class among goaltending. 6'5", 194 pounds, so the size is absolutely there. And in terms of the USHL numbers, it doesn't pop out at you, an .899 save percentage, but I believe the other goaltender that played the most games for Tri-City had like a .973 save percentage, so Pradl was pretty by far their best goaltender, and was great at the U18 Worlds as well for the Slovaks, 914 save percentage in 7 games. I think the big thing with Pradl is just how composed he is, how calm he is in nets, and of course with that size, that's a pretty good combination. The biggest thing though that I think could limit him is just kind of the professional attributes. He's not much of a mover and isn't really great in terms of a movement to recover 2 pucks, get those rebounds especially that are pretty plentiful in his game. So that recovery especially, and making sure that he's more of a consistent goaltender on those first shot attempts, I think could separate him from somebody that's in Europe for a long time to potentially an NHLer. Moving on to number 8, and a QMJHL goaltender here, let's go on to Lucas Beckman, who I think is maybe one of the more underrated goaltenders in this draft class, as an August birthday is one of the youngest as well, but 6'2", 194 pounds. He's not the biggest goaltender in the world, but considering he's one of the youngest prospects, I'm going to give him a little bit of a pass on that. That's really the biggest thing that I think kind of holds Beckman back at this stage, is that I think he's a pretty smart goaltender in terms of his positioning and how he puts himself out there. The problem is the athleticism and the strength on his skates, because there are times where he can kind of get out-muscled around the net, especially where there's a lot of traffic, a lot of competition around him. Finding that extra bit of space, finding especially that lane to see the pucks coming through has been a bit of an issue, I would say, for him. So that's, I think, the biggest thing to really improve on, especially with the NHL and how much perimeter shots can really hurt you. That's, I think, the biggest thing that I want to see him improve on. But I think he could be a decent backup goaltender and somebody that I think could actually turn out to have a pretty good career as long as he gets much stronger than he is right now. At number 9, we go on to a check here in Andrei Stibacek out of the Portland Winterhawks. He's not somebody that is absolutely huge either, 6'2", 176 pounds, but I think in Stibacek's case, one of the most interesting parts about him is the competitiveness, how much he is willing to lay his body on the line to make big saves, especially at clutch moments. I think he's one of the more clutch goaltenders in this draft class, in all honesty. I mean, he was somebody that put up okay numbers with Portland, not overwhelmingly good, but I think just has a good base to build upon, good potential. He's not the biggest in the world, but again, uses that body extraordinarily well, and that's, I think, a major component for successful goaltenders in the NHL. And then finishing us off as the 10th best goaltender in this draft, I go on to Swiss goalie Elijah Neuenschwander. 6'4", 198 pounds, so pretty solid in terms of the size in net. Is one of the older prospects in this class with an October birth date, but somebody that I think had a decent year. I mean, mostly played in the Junior 20 and played some games in the SL, 909 save percentage in 9 games. Played some games as well at the U20 World Juniors, though didn't exactly go too well for him. I think in Neuenschwander's case, the big thing that kind of hurts his stock to me is the lack of much potential, I would say. He's decent in net. He moves okay. He's pretty competitive, but I think lacks some of the big game saves you want to see, especially at higher levels. That's something that I want to see more out of him, is more competitiveness, more actual drive in net. It seems like he can kind of be a little bit more reserved, kind of lean on the size that he's gifted with, and that is very gifted, but I would say for him is probably at best going to be a decent NHL backup, but I still think has a lot of room to grow, but needs to get there to even have a shot at it. Still, though, as a goalie prospect that I think is likely to go around the 4th, 5th round, I think there's worse bets you can make. Somebody with a lot of potential, but a lot of room that you have to fill in to make sure he gets there. But those are my top 10 rankings for every single position in the 2025 NHL Draft, and hopefully you guys did enjoy. It was a ton of fun to talk about these guys, and especially rank them out all like this. It really puts my rankings into perspective, and thank you guys so much for watching all the way to the very end. If you guys enjoyed, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit that notification bell, and comment down below all your thoughts on my rankings, what you guys agree, what you guys disagree with, and who out of the forward, defenseman, goaltending rankings do you want to see your team potentially go after? Let me know your thoughts down below, and of course, make sure you share it with all the fans you guys know online. And if you want some more draft content, you can look on this card for all of my 2025 draft content, which there is a lot right now to binge watch if you haven't already. And I will see you guys in the next one. Make sure you have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.